Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Fireside Chat. It's a lovely spring day in Brooklyn today. I hope it's getting warmer wherever you are. Today's guest is Dana Moriello, Etsy's Director of Seller Growth. We're going to talk to her today about the opportunities that she and her team are creating for Etsy sellers through wholesale and manufacturing. If you are new to the Fireside Chats are a regular programming we do on Etsy here to take your questions on social media and talk to different people throughout Etsy's company, just to kind of give you a chance to meet different people and to have your questions answered. And every time we focus on a different area. Let's start here. Dana, hi. When did you join Etsy and what brought you here? We've been working together a long time now.
Yes, yeah. I joined Etsy almost 4 years ago. And before I came here, I worked in the cosmetics industry for a long time doing product development there, which I absolutely loved. And then I went to business school and started a cosmetic importing business. Stopped that after a year because I saw all this opportunity for people to be investing in my business, me to be investing in other people's business, and to make that process of peer-to-peer investing easier. So I started a crowdfunding business. I ran that for about 3 years. There were some legislative challenges around crowdfunding, so I wound up lobbying for a year, which I never could have predicted. And through that process, worked with a lot of Etsy sellers on access to capital who happened to be coming to our startup. And then I contacted Etsy and said, can we work together? Is there something we can do? And I've had a number of different roles since I've been here.
I love it. Etsy's mission is to reimagine commerce, and part of accomplishing this is creating opportunities for sellers to do what they love and to grow in a values-aligned way. How does your team play a role in that?
Our goal is to reimagine wholesale and reimagine manufacturing. Both of those two things are great ways that a seller might choose to grow their business, and we want to make sure that those channels are accessible to sellers and they're accessible in really values-aligned ways, which requires this reimagining.
Great. Well, let's start with wholesale. Let's just start by giving sellers an idea of what wholesale is and what Etsy means by when we talk about Etsy wholesale.
Wholesaling is a channel of distribution you might go into with your business where you're selling to a retailer who's then reselling to the consumer. In our case, we're working with retailers who are buying from you in bulk and holding that inventory to resell. Etsy Wholesale is a marketplace. It's a vetted marketplace where we're bringing on wholesale-ready independent designers and connecting them with a screened group of retailers who want to purchase from them and providing all the tools to make those transactions easy.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit about what your team does?
So on the wholesale side, we have a team that's working on making wholesale as accessible as possible for sellers. So providing education to sellers, making sure that they are as prepared as possible to get into these relationships. We also have part of that wholesale team who's working on building this retailer community and making sure that there's a large community of values-aligned retailers who are ready to make purchases from these Etsy sellers.
So an example of the education for sellers would be the recent email campaign
Perfect
some of our
example.
viewers may have been participating in. So as part of this work, you mentioned building a community of retailers. Why do you think this is a good thing for sellers?
More buyers for our
More
sellers.
buyers, yes.
So we want to build a large community of retailers that are interested in purchasing from independent designers. So part of what we're doing in building the brand of Etsy Wholesale is making sure we're bringing qualified demand to sellers who are looking for what they have to offer, and then creating great partnerships. And it's all about that relationship.
I think too, one thing we talk about a lot is that by having a real diversity of types of retailers, it gives opportunities for lots of different types of sellers to be able to participate in wholesale. So what types of sellers are a good fit for Etsy Wholesale? We may have people watching who may be curious or interested, or maybe are wondering if their shop could be ready. Could you talk to them a little bit about what you and your team are looking for?
Yeah. So there's a checklist that you might think about as a seller of deciding if wholesale is a good fit for your business. So the first thing I think about is, are you looking to increase your sales? That's the first piece. So yes, you are. You want to grow your business? Terrific. This is a channel to consider. Is your pricing right? Is the next thing to consider. Retailers are looking for 50% off of retail. Is that something that you can sustain? That's the next thing. Do you have a full product assortment? Retailers, if they're going to build a relationship with you, there's a lot to invest up front in that relationship. So once they build it, they want to know it's something they can grow over time. So you have many products they can buy into. They can continue to invest in your line. So those are some things that you can consider. And are you interested in the benefits of forming a relationship with a retailer? Is it exciting to you to have your products be seen in stores? There's a Quit Your Day Job post, which I'd really highly recommend that everyone check out, from the shop Strawberry Luna, where she talks about her decision-making process of going into wholesale and being a multi-channel seller, and how at first she wasn't sure about the pricing, but then ultimately made the pricing work because she really liked the operational efficiencies of getting larger orders one at a time and being able to pull those out. And what she found that she really liked and talks about in the article is that she was able to form relationships with retailers.
Okay. What's a challenge that an Etsy seller might encounter when considering wholesale?
I got to go back to the pricing.
Right.
It is not easy to be able to offer a 50% discount to a retailer, especially if you started your business as direct to consumer.
Sure.
With that pricing model. It does require a rethinking. And we've seen some sellers as a result create new product lines. Maybe they're raising their retail pricing. It's a big consideration.
So sellers might create one line to sell on Etsy and then create a separate line that would have higher pricing that they could do for wholesale.
Exactly. Yeah. One example might be if you make hand-painted stationery, you might have a printed stationery line which you're wholesaling, which has a better cost structure, and retain that line of hand-painted cards to sell only direct to consumer.
Right. I've heard of sellers also sort of selling their prototypes on Etsy and then selling
It's a great idea.
the line on an Etsy wholesale. So I've heard some sellers worry that another challenge might be assuming that they have to create a massive amount of inventory, and that would really make it where they couldn't participate in wholesale. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because it's something that I hear a lot when I talk to sellers about wholesale.
The retailers that form the majority of our community are small businesses, just like our sellers are. So you'll see from these small businesses, some of them are placing orders as low as 5, 10, 20 units. It's really a range. And then we have large retailers like Macy's and Whole Foods that are placing larger orders. So we have a real diversity of interest. And I think the most important thing to consider that as a seller, you are in the driver's seat. You are setting the minimum order of what you want a retailer to be buying. And you can also say yes or no to an order.
Sure.
So unlike on the retail platform, when someone places an order and you fill that, this is a request. It's a request for a quantity, and you can always say no. And we have some sellers who say no because it's too small, and some who say no because it's too large.
Good. It's good to know that people have choice and they have more control over it. How do Etsy sellers apply, and what do you look for? It is a somewhat vetted and curated process.
It is. We're looking for what we call wholesale ready independent designers. So you would apply through etsy.com/wholesale. And the things that we're looking for there are, can you offer 50% off of retail? Because that's what we want to be able to promise to the retailers who are browsing the platform, as they can find that pricing structure. Do you have a clean track record on Etsy, a record of great customer service? And do you have a relatively full product line? As I said, if you have one or two products, you're not going to be able to meet the needs of the retailers that we have there.
Great. So you recently announced the launch of the wholesale retailer commitments, which I think is so exciting. Can you tell our viewers what this is and what the impact is for sellers?
Yeah, I'm so excited about this. I think this is what I'm most proud of that our team has done last year. So this is a set of guidelines for how large retailers can work with Etsy sellers. And as I said, we have this diverse retail community where the majority of it is small, independent businesses. But we do have a few larger retailers because our sellers tell us that they're looking for that it's really aspirational to be in these large retailers. At the same time, retailers approach us frequently and say, we'd love to work with Etsy sellers. This is what the people coming into our store are asking for. They're asking for independent design. They're asking for a greater connection to the maker. Although there is demand on both sides to be in these relationships, there's also a lot of challenges that we saw and got feedback on. So one of the big challenges is, believe it or not, these large retailers are looking for even better than a 50% discount. In many cases, a 65% discount. Our sellers are saying that is really, really hard to meet, especially off the bat, before you know if you like each other, before you know if it's going to be a long-term relationship. The other feedback we got is that when you work with a large retailer, there's a dense compliance manual that you need to follow. Everything from how you ship your items, the UPC codes you place on them. And that's very new if you've never done it before.
Sure.
And if you don't get some of those things right, there can be penalties to doing that. And it's a scary process. And so we put in place these guidelines to solve those challenges and many others. So for example, one of the guidelines is that for the first 6 months of this relationship, the retailer needs to be purchasing at a 50% discount or whatever that seller has in their line sheet on Etsy Wholesale. We also say that for that compliance manual, the seller needs to get a point of contact at Whole Foods, at Macy's, someone they can actually call and ask questions.
Great. Any other exciting wins for Etsy sellers that you want to share?
Yes, we now have Etsy sellers in Macy's in Herald Square. They're our latest retailer to sign up for the commitments, and believe it or not, the second most visited tourist destination in New York. So talk about exposure
So
for our sellers.
We were both there on the opening night, and the sellers were just so excited. I mean, it was just such an incredible night.
Yeah.
Real accomplishment. So let's shift to manufacturing, and I think this is probably one of the more misunderstood things that we've done here at Etsy, and I think the more we can talk about it, the better. And I want to preface it by saying what I always say, which is that we know the vast majority of shops at Etsy are single maker shops. They want to keep it that way. That's totally great. We just want to provide this option if people get to a place in their business where they need outside production assistance, that they can source it responsibly and find a manufacturing partner who really syncs with the level of craftsmanship that they want and their values alignment. And so that's what we're really talking about here. So before we talk about what your team does, let's talk a little bit about what outside manufacturing looks like at Etsy.
Yep. So when we talk about outside manufacturing, we're talking about any time that you as a designer partner with someone outside of your business to help you make some or all of your item. So an example of this, and in all of these cases, you as the designer are still the one who owns that design, has the authorship over what it is, and you're creating a partnership. So it might be that you're creating a partnership with someone who's going to print your designs. That example of someone who had been doing hand-painted stationery and then decides that they want to scale and they need someone to print these designs. It's a perfect example. You might be working with someone who you're a jeweler and you don't do metal plating of your jewelry in-house, and so you have a partner who does that.
Sure.
They're all examples.
Okay, great. And can you, just to be really clear, can you tell me what we mean when we say a manufacturer? Because I think a lot of people hear that word and they think a huge factory. What are we talking about?
Yeah, it's far from that stereotype, actually. So many of the manufacturers on the platform are single individuals or very small family businesses. So I think the best way to talk about it is to give you some examples of who these manufacturers are on the platform. So one manufacturer, Cardinal Shoe Corporation, we love, they are based in Massachusetts. They have about 30, 40 people at any given time who work there, third generation family business. You can browse their profile on Etsy Manufacturing and you can meet the people who are there. You can hear the story of why their great grandfathers started this business, and they love working with small designers. Their sweet spot is to work with Etsy sellers and other independent designers and help them take their vision into reality. They also recently put solar panels on their roof. We're talking about really values aligned manufacturers there. I'd also give another example. That's on the larger side of the manufacturers we work with. So a lot of the manufacturers there are individuals as well.
Any Etsy sellers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some of them are Etsy sellers. So we have a few Etsy sellers who have purchased laser cutting and laser engraving equipment for their own shops, and then decided they had excess capacity when this machine was sitting around. Why not let other people be using that as well and take orders from them to do that contract manufacturing?
Sure. I use this example a lot, but we were, I think when manufacturing was sort of in development, we were trying to understand more about sellers' needs. We met with a number of sellers, and two conversations really had an impression on me. The first was a seller who was making pillows, and she got her first wholesale order and couldn't keep up, and she had to ask everywhere and find a seamstress who lived a county over. She drove and sat next to her, and they made pillows together. It was really great.
Yep.
But the other person I met there was a woman who had just bought a monogramming machine that was an incredibly huge investment for her. And she was saying it would be so great if I could make for other Etsy sellers to help me pay for the machine. It would be just so incredible.
Yeah.
So I really think of those two examples. One thing we hear a lot too is that the vast majority of sellers or designers who want to work with a manufacturer or an outside production assistant, never started with that as their business goal.
Yeah.
It was just that they reached she just reached a crucial moment in her business where she couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
Maybe it was seasonal. Perhaps she just got that first wholesale order, or got featured on a blog and suddenly had more business. And something I've thought for a long time is like these should be moments of celebration that the business is growing, not the thing that sort of takes the business under because the person can't keep up. So I'm glad that there's an opportunity for people to get help when they need it. So what are your thoughts on people who don't see manufacturing fitting into their businesses?
That's also a perfectly fine
Yeah.
business decision. And
Sure.
we're in the business at Etsy of empowering our sellers and giving people choice to succeed on their own terms. And if manufacturing is right for you, we want to give you the options to do that in an accessible, values-aligned way. And if it's not, we want to provide you with other options for growth.
Can you talk a little bit about how Etsy manufacturing works? So if you're a seller who was at a place where you needed that sort of help, what would you do? How would you go through that process?
So you'd go to Etsy Manufacturing, is the etsy.com/manufacturing. And first you'd see a lot of education there. And I think that's an important first step. This
Being ready to
yeah.
have that conversation.
So there's education there about, is manufacturing the right choice for your business? How do you make that decision? There's also pieces in there about how do you form a really great relationships? It's all about relationships. And then you'll see a directory of manufacturers that you can search through, find someone who might be local to you, who shares your values, and put all of your personal decision-making criteria in.
Yeah. Always when we talk to Etsy sellers, cost is never the most important factor in making that decision. It's about locale, relationship, those sorts of things. Let's see. So we've heard we want people to achieve success on their own terms, and we really think of, as you said, like our work as being providing as many options for success as possible for sellers. How does your team make this more accessible for sellers?
The first piece is the education of deciding, is this right for you?
Sure.
How can you form these great relationships? So that's a big piece of it. The other piece of it is the big challenge that we hear all the time is, okay, I got over the hurdle of deciding if this is going to be right for me. I really do think it is, but how on earth do I find this person who wants to work with me at small volumes and meets the values criteria I have, because that's important to me. So the first thing that we did is we've been creating this community. We've been bringing these manufacturers on who are a good fit for working with Etsy sellers, and that's a big part of the value we're providing.
Sure. So we've been really excited this year to announce the Etsy Seller Advisory Board, SAB, which will gather 15 sellers from around the world to talk through, some of the complex issues facing our community. And you've also been running an advisory board around manufacturing, and I wanted you to just share a little bit of that with people. They may not be aware.
Yeah, part of the reason that we started an advisory board for manufacturing when we first started considering this as a possible product and option that we could give our sellers was that we didn't know everything. Like, there's a humility in creating advisory boards of saying we don't have all the answers. We need to bring in experts who do. Who are going to help us create a better product. Who are going to push us to go further with what this is. So we created a board of experts. One of them is an Etsy seller, Alexandra Ferguson. We have Bridget Rousseau, who runs marketing at Shinola. We have manufacturers, we have academics, we have a broad range of individuals. We gather them once every quarter. We give them an update on what we're doing, and we say, push us, what more could we be doing to give a better experience for both the sellers and the manufacturers on this platform. So for example, when we met last quarter, we talked about what can we do to get sellers better prepared to be in successful relationships with manufacturers.
Yeah, great. So before we go, totally changing gears, I want to spend just a minute talking about female entrepreneurship, since you're one of many female directors at Etsy, and so many of our sellers are women. What's your number one piece of advice for female entrepreneurs?
I love this question. Thank you for asking. My mom is also a female executive and someone I greatly admire, and has given me a lot of advice in my life that I take to heart. The one piece that I think about every day that she told me is, don't strive to be liked, strive to be respected. And I see this coming up a lot with rising female leaders, is that if your goal is to be well liked above all, and you want to be friends with everybody, that is a hard goal to achieve, and probably not
Impossible.
a worthy one. Yeah,
Actually.
impossible is a great word for it.
Yeah.
But if you strive for respect, it's leaders who have people's respect that they want to follow.
Absolutely. I want to meet your mom. She gives good advice. So thanks everyone for tuning in. As always, if you have questions, please feel free to write our support team. I do want to, as always, give a verbal disclaimer that this information here is true as of today, but if you watch it in the future, just be mindful of that because some of the information may have changed. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Talk to you next time.